Sarah. Welcome back to the Library of Parthos. Today I'm going to be sharing with you a book trilogy that I was so excited to start reading. It took me forever, but I'm glad that I finally did get to read it. And that is the Folk of the Air trilogy by Holly Black. So we're going to be talking about all three books in the trilogy: The Cruel Prince, The Wicked King, and The Queen of Nothing. And then there's also this, I don't know quite whether to call it a prequel, sequel, just like a short story, how the King of Elfhame learned to hate stories. So we'll be talking about that as well. Before we kind of get into a summary of the stories and my thoughts, I just kind of wanted to preface this with a little bit about how Holly Black creates her characters. First of all, she's a pretty well-known author of like middle grade fantasy, YA fantasy, and she just released her first adult fantasy book, The Book of Night, this year in May, which I just started, so I'm excited to really get into that. I'm still in the first few chapters. But she does fae and fairies and all of those fantastical creatures kind of the way that they're supposed to be done, the way that they've been done throughout history and stories and myths and tales and all of those things. So if you're not used to that, it kind of might throw you off a little bit. Some of the more modern authors that have kind of come out with stories about fae in particular, they kind of just get rid of all of those character traits, the not being able to lie, all of that kind of stuff, and they just kind of create their own version of fae that fits whatever world they're building. And I've enjoyed a lot of the stories that I've read like that, but Holly Black kind of sticks true to the way that they've been portrayed throughout history, so that might come off a little rough if you're not used to it. They're just not nice. I don't know how else to say that. They're just mean. And so I did a little bit of research, not really research, but I have this book by Brian Frond and Alan Lee, who they're kind of most known for their work on some of the sketches, the early sketches, early concept art for Lord of the Rings, and they also worked with Jim Henson for some of his projects like The Dark Crystal, that sort of thing. So they have this book about fairies, and I know for a fact that Holly Black has this book. I saw her talk about it in an interview, which inspired me to buy it. I don't really think like new copies are being printed. If it's something that you're interested in, you might be able to find like a used copy on Amazon, or I would check eBay. That's probably your best bet for finding it. But it kind of goes through some of the fantastical creatures and kind of gives you some information about them, and has some more traditional tales in it as well. But on their section about the fairy ways, they mention that fairies are mischievous, spiteful, and dangerous. And I just thought that was a really good description for how Holly Black chose to create her characters in this trilogy. So again, if that's not something that you're used to, that's not something you're expecting, it might kind of throw you for a loop, because again, they're just mean. I really, again, don't really know how else to describe it. But I'll kind of give a quick summary. I'll do spoiler-free summary first, then I'll go into each of the books with a little more in-depth, and then kind of share my thoughts at the end. So if you definitely don't want spoilers, right before I get to the part about all of the books individually, you might want to skip to the end of the video to hear kind of my final thoughts. And if you have already read the book or you really don't mind spoilers, then feel free to keep watching. So the story centers around a mortal girl named Jude. She does have a twin sister, Taryn. She and her sister are raised in fairyland. And they do kind of visit the mortal realm too, so that is a part of the story. They are raised with some of the gentry of fairyland, so they are in the same classes that some of the royalty are in. One of the members of their class is Prince Carden, the youngest prince, the youngest son of the King of Elfhame. So the king is kind of ready to stop ruling. He's ready to pass his crown on to somebody else, but he does not have to pass it to his firstborn. That's one of the rules. It does have to go to a member of his family, but it does not have to go to his firstborn. So you kind of think you know who's going to get the crown, and then all these things happen, and it's just kind of chaos and kind of a fight for who's going to get the throne next. So that's kind of resolved in the first story, but then there are kind of elements of that continue throughout the rest of the book. And throughout all three stories, you do see this relationship between Jude and Cardan, who they start out as, I would say, enemies. I do have some thoughts on that I'll share later, but they start out kind of hating each other, and their relationship does change throughout the story. So that's kind of as much as I want to say without giving spoilers, but I will start going through kind of all three books and just sharing my thoughts about those now. So again, if you don't want spoilers, maybe stop the video here. If you have already read the stories or you don't mind the spoilers, then feel free to keep watching. Starting with The Cruel Prince, the first book in the story. As I mentioned, Jude and her twin sister Taryn are mortals that live in fairyland. Now here's the interesting part. The reason they live in fairyland is because their mother was formerly married to somebody in fairyland, faked her death, and left with her very young daughter, who was Fae. She has like cat ears. She marries somebody else and has twins in the mortal realm, and then her ex-husband comes along and kills her and her current husband. So here are these three girls. One's his biological daughter, and then two are the daughter of his ex-wife and a mortal. And he says, you know, okay, price has been paid, everything's taken care of, so now, like, I'll take care of you. And he raises all three of them. So that kind of leads to this really weird relationship between Jude and Maddox, because she's, you know, it's the only father that she really remembers. She does remember her mortal father, but the majority of her life has been spent in fairyland. They connect very well. She is interested in a lot of the same things that he is. He is very into like battle and war, and she is kind of too. She wants to be a knight. So they have this really great connection, but at the same time, he murdered her parents. So it's a weird relationship throughout most of the story. So as I mentioned, the king of Elfhame, King Eldred, has decided that it's time for his rule to end. He's going to pass the crown on to one of his children. Now, the way that the crown works, it's a blood crown, so it has to be passed on to somebody of that same bloodline. There's some other rules that kind of go around this crown too, but he does not have to give it to his firstborn. It can be anybody, any of his children. So everyone's kind of pretty sure that they know who it's going to go to. They think it's going to go to Prince Dane. He's kind of been working with his father a little bit. So Jude ends up becoming a spy for Prince Dane. And then all this craziness goes down at the coronation. So Prince Dane he's about to get the crown. He kills his sisters. And I think one of his, it's a big mess. Basically, everyone in the royal family ends up dying except for one of the older princes, Baelkin, and Cardan, the youngest, who, like, nobody ever thought he was going to become the king. In fact, there was a prophecy that said if he ruled, the crown and the throne would be destroyed. So everyone's like, no, don't invest any time in him. So, like, he was raised as a prince, but he was not given any of the training to take the crown. So Jude kind of sees an opportunity. She kidnaps Cardan, holds a knife to his throat, and kind of says, like, I'm going to keep you here until we figure out what to do, because your brother still needs you alive. The crown you have to be crowned by another family member, so he has to keep Cardan alive if he wants to take the crown. But at the same time, they really don't want him to become the king. So eventually they find out that Jude's adopted younger brother, Oak, is also the son of the king. He was kind of hidden in this long, elaborate plot to get him out of there. So then Jude conducts this idea to put her brother on the throne instead. Cardan's kind of down to go with it. He has never had any interest in ruling, but at the last minute she tricks him and has her brother put the crown on his head so that he can kind of hold the throne and rule until her brother is old enough and he ends up going into the mortal realm to live for a little bit. So that's kind of the major plot elements of the first story. As I said, Jude and Cardan's relationship kind of changes throughout the story. I think they're considered like an enemies to lovers couple, but I don't know that I would consider them enemies to lovers, simply because they hate each other and they're very vocal about that, but it seems more like it's an obsession. Not really like, I hate you so much, just more like, I hate you because I have these feelings and I know that I shouldn't have those feelings about you. At one point, Jude sneaks into Cardan's room and she finds a book from the mortal realm, which she's pretty excited about, Alice in Wonderland. So she opens it up, and inside the story is just a page with her name written over and over and over and over and over again. I thought I could find it in the book, but probably should have bookmarked it. Oh well. Anyway, it's just Jude, 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 like all over the page. So again, I kind of think it's more of like an obsession than enemies to lovers. I think they are just so upset that they have these feelings for the person they're supposed to hate. They do end up kissing when she has a knife to his throat. So again, kind of like they're kind of mean. But that's kind of the end of the first book. The Wicked King is the second book in the series. So Cardan is now the king of Elfhame, and Jude is like his right-hand woman, so it seems, except we as the readers know that she's the one calling the shots. So she made this deal with Cardan that he needs to rule for a year and a day at least until she can figure out a way to keep him on the throne longer. But she's also been giving him these commands. So she's the one that's actually like ruling. He just is kind of the face of the crown. And at first he's kind of just like, whatever, I'm going to continue like partying and living my life and not really caring. Like, I never wanted to become king in the first place. I'll just do whatever you say because I kind of have to. So that's how it starts. And Jude is kind of wearing down pretty fast. She's taking care of all of these things, making sure her brother is safe in the mortal realm. Her sister is getting married to this guy who's like really not nice. He kind of strung Jude along for a little bit and then was like, oh, I just wanted to see if your sister would still stay with me if I started like hanging out with you. It just, again, mean. So she's starting to wear down from basically ruling an entire kingdom herself. And some of the courts within Elfhame are not happy with Cardan on the throne. They never wanted him to rule. Again, there's that prophecy hanging over his head that he's gonna ruin the throne and the crown. So lots of people are disinterested in him and they want him off. So all of these other plots start to happen. Jude gets kidnapped by the Undersea and she's there for quite a long time. And Cardan then has to kind of step up and rule, and he makes a deal to get her back, which she's really surprised about because with her gone, he didn't have to follow any of her commands. He didn't have to do what she said. She was like, hey, he's probably going to leave me here because I would leave me here. But he does make a deal to get her back. And at that point, he kind of says, you know, I don't really mind being king, but you have to let me rule and make my own decisions. So I think the best solution to this issue of you wanting control and me also needing to be king is let's get married and you can become the queen. And then we can equally make decisions and rule. So Jude's kind of like, okay, there's something going on. There's some trick to this, but she agrees. And then she ends up in a duel with his older brother who's still trying to take the throne. She kills him, and then she is exiled until pardoned by the crown. So she is sent to the mortal realm, and she cannot return until the crown pardons her. And then in the last book, The Queen of Nothing, she starts out still being exiled to the mortal world. Her sister Taryn comes to find her and says, hey, I killed my husband, and I'm pregnant. But they're gonna try to glamour me if if there's like an inquest into why he was killed, they're gonna try to glamour me and I'm gonna have to tell the truth. So can you go in my place? And Jude's kind of doesn't really want to, but then she ends up doing it. She has protection that was placed on her so that she can't be glamored. So she wouldn't have to tell the truth. She could lie and still pretend to be Taryn, and no one would know any different. Except Carden. He knew right away who she was and kind of tricks her and like pulls her away. Not really tricks her, but kind of just gets her by herself, and she ends up getting kidnapped by her stepfather, who still thinks she's Taryn. He thinks she's her twin. Then she's able to finally get back to the palace, and then Carden says, you know, you're the queen. You have part of the crown, and you have your own crown, so you could have come back anytime you wanted. You could have just pardoned yourself. And she is furious that she didn't figure that out. But again, she was kind of thinking that he was trying to trick her. So eventually it looks like there might be a war. Her stepfather is very determined to take control of the crown so that he can rule in place of her, like as regent for her little brother. So he starts to ally with some of the other courts who weren't really interested in Carden's reign, and they start to prepare for war. So during this time, there's a lot going on. There's a smith who has come back into the graces of the king. He is the one who originally made the blood crown. He can make all these other weapons, but he also curses them too. So like if you do something that he doesn't want you to do, he put like you'll be cursed. And in the midst of all of this, Carden just kind of casually mentions like, hey, you probably know this already, but I love you. Just throwing that out there. And then the throne does indeed break during his reign. And then he kind of realizes that maybe the prophecy wasn't such a bad thing, and he just snaps the blood crown in half, but the blood crown's cursed. So then he turns into this giant snake, and Jude is like absolutely distraught. She doesn't really know what to do. The people have started to accept her as queen, but she also like doesn't want to lose Carden, but isn't sure if she can save him. The answer that she keeps getting is death. She doesn't want to kill the snake because she's afraid that she'll lose Carden, but she also doesn't want to just keep him like imprisoned in there. So eventually she does cut off its head, and out comes Carden. He just walks out, and they're able to rule together, at which point of course she says, I love you too, and basically they all kind of live happily ever after. So before I get into how the King of Elfhame learned to hate stories, just a couple of my thoughts. First of all, I loved this series. I did really enjoy how Holly Black kind of stuck to that original characteristics of the Fae, that they can't lie, that they would, that they would like kind of trick you and do all of these different things. They would glamour humans and take humans up from their beds if they like bargained and made these deals. So I did enjoy that because I felt like it was probably challenging as a writer to have to stick to all of those kind of things. And I like how she didn't change it to like forward her plot, which I thought was really cool. So Jude is basically just trying to find the place that she belongs. She doesn't really belong in fairyland because she's immortal, but she was raised in fairyland, so she doesn't really belong in the mortal world either. So she's trying to find a purpose that she can serve, something that she can do, and that's kind of what drives her throughout most of the story. And Carden also is kind of trying to prove that he's different than what people thought, and also looking for a place to belong. You know, he was kind of just thrown away most of his life, but he was important enough that he had to be kept around, but nobody wanted really anything to do with him. So he's trying to find that place as well. So I think they ended up finding that together, which is really cool. I like that Taryn kind of got what she kind of got what she wanted, but then realized that maybe that wasn't the best choice for her, and kind of took matters into her own hands. I'm not saying it's okay that she killed her husband. He was quite awful to her, but she always wanted to belong. She basically just wanted to get married and live as one of like the members of the court, and she got that. It just didn't quite look how she thought it would. And I also kind of like how Jude and Maddox's relationship almost stayed the same throughout all 3 stories. They were at odds with each other a lot, but they had this mutual respect, you know, and he even says at the end, like, he says he'll never surrender, like, that's just not an option, he's going to win. But when Jude kills the snake and Cardan comes walking out, he says, like, look, you've already won, I'm bowing to you, not to him. I'm bowing to you. So that was really cool too. I like I said, the relationship is complicated, but I really enjoyed it. So the last story is, I don't really know whether to call it like a sequel, a prequel, what it's kind of both. So it takes place after the trilogy is over, after the Queen of Nothing, because Cardan and Jude are married, they're both rulers, her coronation has ended, and they're going back to the mortal realm. Somebody that she used to work with when she was exiled needs her help and has a job for her. So they're going back there to help with this job, but the troll that they're going to be encountering is somebody that Cardan knew as a child. So it kind of flips back and forth between what they're doing now and also his interactions with this troll woman in the past, so you get to see a little bit more of his childhood. It is written from his perspective, which is cool because all of the other books are kind of written more from Jude's perspective. I thought it was really interesting to kind of see his thoughts, especially like his feelings toward Jude, which are not very, like, it's not mushy at all. It's just very like, you know, she's the person that I tolerate the most. So I enjoyed seeing his feelings for Jude, and kind of his thoughts on what happened a little bit more. He knew she was plotting something, that she was going to try to take care of it on her own, and he was like, haha, I'm going to outsmart her. I'm going to go and take care of it on my own first because I'm capable and I can do this. And then he ends up needing her anyway. So those are my ramblings on the Folk of the Air trilogy by Holly Black. I'm so glad that I finally got the chance to read these, but thank you so much for watching. I hope you get to read these books too, and if you do, let me know what your thoughts were. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you soon. Bye!